أولا ها هي مقدمتي باللغة العربية، وبعد ذلك سأتحدث باللغة الإنجليزية. شكرا على دعوتك وشكرا لمكرم عباس. هدفي هو ملخص لكم من عملي على القرآن. تشير هذه الكلمة إلى ترجمة القرآن باللغات اللاتينية بين القرن الثاني عشر والسابع عشر. تم تنفيذ 10 الترجمات للقرآن في الغرب باللغة اللاتينية. كل هذه الترجمات تريد أن تجادل، هذا مهم، تجادل. يريدون فهم القرآن لانتقاد الإسلام، لكن المترجمون دقيقون وجادون. لقد بذلوا جهودا كبيرة للترجمات، والقارئ هو الذي يحكم وينتقد في القرآن وليس المترجمين. سأستخدم مثال سورة الفاتحة لشرح طرق الترجمة. سأخذ 3 ترجمات لاتينية فقط. سأعرض نتائج هذه النصوص اللاتينية الثلاثة. هل يمكن اللغة اللاتينية أن يفهم معاني الفاتحة العديدة؟ This is what I want to explain during the following minutes with you. First, who are the translators? What are their skills to translate the Quran in this Alcoranus in Latin? Today, I only keep 3 for convenience, the most representative translations of the Quran. Robert of Ketton first was an Englishman who came to Spain around 1140 to learn astrology. He studied astronomy and mathematics in Catalonia. It was a boat of Cluny Peter the Venerable, who commissioned from him a translation of the Quran and had difficulty in detaching him from his studies to carry out the translation. Peter's goal is to have reliable information about the Quran in order to convince Muslims that Christianity was the true religion, by the weapons of the reason and not only with strike. Who translated the Quran of Robert? Robert was a Latin, but backed by a Muslim called Muhammad. So he's an Arabic-speaking Latin assisted by a Muslim Arab. This version had a great success with 18 complete manuscripts preserved. Then this version was published in 1543 in Basel by the Protestant theologian Bibliander, then translated into Italian, German, and Dutch. Until the middle of the 17th century, the West knew the Quran primarily from this version. The second Latin Quran, that of Mark, Canon of Toledo, who was a Mozarabic, that is to say, an Arabic-speaking Christian by birth, who lived under Muslim rule before the conquest of Al-Andalus by the Christian kingdoms of the north. He studied medicine. Then in 1210, he translated the Quran at the request of the Bishop of Burgos. This man is therefore on horseback between the 2 civilizations, but his work is unsuccessful with 2 manuscripts. Finally, Ludovico Marracci was a priest at the service of the papacy, Arabic-speaking. He translated the Bibles and the Quran, and his work was the last Latin translation of the Quran. It was published in Padova in 1698. His translation is preceded by a vast controversial file, very detailed, studying the language, the history of the Quran. Each surah, each chapter is supplemented by notes and scholarly comments. He wants to give missionaries a textbook to challenge the Quran. He uses the sacred text to demonstrate its error, and his vision is controversial, but his notes are very rich. Here you have a picture of the Fatiha, the Surat al-Fatiha, in one of the manuscripts of Robert of Ketton. Here you have a manuscript of 17th century of Mark of Toledo. And here you have the book published by Ludovico Marracci in Rome. And you can see here that Marracci gave the Arabic text and the translation. At the opposite, Mark of Toledo and Robert never gave the Arabic text. All these authors assume a clear controversial project in their prologue. All have an intimate knowledge of Arabic, but not necessarily of Islam or of its own culture. Mark and Ludovico are more learned than Robert, who was first of all a mathematician. In the general aspect, the Surah, Fatiha, opens in Arabic as in Latin with the Basmala, the invocatory formula in the name of God, essential at the beginning of each prayer. Robert of Ketton is considerably
Hello.
Hello. Do you want to come in the? It's good. Can I continue? Yeah. Here you have Ludovico Marracci, and Robert of Ketton adapts the text by recutting, simplifying, and reformulating verses 2 to 4, which Mark of Toledo is careful of following step by step the Arabic syntax and even its rhythm. Ludovico is even more scrupulous. He gives the Arabic text, then the Latin cut into verses, offers explanatory notices, as you can see here at left. And those notes is to better understand the text. And finally notes here at right, to criticize the text, but the both are not confused. It even gives a split in Jaz and Hizb here. There is a, okay, you heard me? No problem. First, I propose you to begin with the explanation of the title, the surah title. The first surah, Al-Fatiha, opens the Quran, Fataha, to open. It's also the key to its general interpretation. It associates in 7 short verses the Muslim profession of faith, the reminder of the Last Judgment, and the unity of the community in the worship of the one God. Robert, as you can see here, translates the title as Azorah, beginning of the mother of the book, containing 7 sentences in Latin. What is very curious is Azora. Azora it's the word surah, not translated, but Robert transposes the Arabic directly into Latin as Azora, as surah became Azora, Azoar. The first surah is called by Robert Capitulum, that is a chapter or a section of a text. However, this word also indicates the head of a text, its beginning, which clearly indicates the introductory nature of this prayer, head and beginning of the Quran. So it's a relevant synonym to Fatiha. According to the tafsir, the surah is the mother of the book, al-Kitab. Robert knows the traditional title of the surah, which he faithfully transposes, Mater Libri, mother of the book. The indication of 7 verba, seven sentences, 7 words, translates from Arabic ayat. In Tabari, in the tafsir of Tabari, ayat designates a sign and also a story. The parallel between verbum in Latin and ayah in Arabic is particularly true because the Arabic word indicates the prodigious nature of the verse revealed by God as a miracle. As for the Latin term, it applies to a sentence, to a precept, and to any meaningful word, but also to the Christ, as the divine word came to humanity. The two substantives, therefore, jointly express the sacred word transmitted. Mark calls the surah material of the book of 7 periods, first section of Azor. The word materia in Latin has the meaning of framework, of material substances. The 7 periods is a term in Latin rhetoric designating a line and more particularly its final part. Mark identifies a specific poetic form in the Quran in his tradition. He also transcribed surah by azora, or section, a word which means the cut, the division. It's a pejorative term in Latin. And basically, Ludovico offers 2 versions with slight differences. He translates first surah of the Alcoran opening, Mecca, divided in 7. He gives a phonetic transcription, Alcoran, a good literal translation, opening. The Fatiha is opening chapter of the Quran, like a muftah, like a key, and sings the surah according to the Latin rhetoric, because in Latin the comma is a small part of a verse composed of 2 feet and 1 syllable. So it's very interesting because Ludovico feels very good that the Quran is the Fatiha is a poetic system of a story. On the other hand, he prefers the notion of comma to that of period, so he reduces the verse to a phrase, but marked by a particular rhythm. He knows some Islamic background, since he knows it was revealed in Mecca. So for these 3 authors, the Fatiha refers to a particular poetics and not to a prose text, even if this poetry does not correspond to anything in Latin. First verse Robert translate Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim by to God merciful and benevolent. Deus, Deo, God, translates El-Ilah, the God. Misericords means compassionate, merciful, translates Rahman, that is to say the idea of compassion towards his creature. Pious means reduce, pious, good, who takes pity. And in Arabic, Rahim, very merciful, full of love, of compassion. And the expression misericords et pius in Latin comes from Saint Cyprian and Saint Ambrose, and especially from the Liber Mozarabicus Sacramentorum, who was written by Arab Christians from Toledo. It's therefore possible that Robert adapts the Quran to the Mozarabic liturgy of Al-Andalus. Perhaps. For Mark, he translates in the name of God merciful who takes pity. And you see that Ludovico, the translation is very close to Mark 1. Miseritor, who has pity, merciful. And what is very interesting is the both word, misericordis, miseratoris, because in Latin, the expression gives a rhythm in Latin, which is close to the rhythm of tajweed in Arabic. So Mark is able to imitate in Latin the Quranic style, at least he adapt it, maybe, I think so. And Ludovico certainly uses Mark's translation, which means that the Latin very early had the same interpretation of this verse, with the idea of a rhythmic and syntactic comparison close to Arabic. The absence of the basmala here is interesting because in the tafsir, it does not belong to the surah. I maybe don't have time to explain the whole surah, but it doesn't matter. Verses 2 and 3. Robert here creates a very short verse, a very short translation. He removes the repetition of the verses 3 because for him it has no importance for the meaning. While in Quranic Arabic, this verse responds to a sound, a poetic logic, and to worship from the Quran. And this is very important because for Latin translator, when you repeat the same verse, the same sentence, it doesn't matter, you can cut it. But in the Quran, you don't have to do that because it's very important. So Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim was written at the top of the surah, so I cut it, no problem. Mark is closer to the text, to the Arabic text. It transforms the root Hamida, the praise, the thanksgiving, by Gloria. The correspondence in Hamida and Gloria is not good unless we consider the Gloria of the Mass, where the faithful confess the poor and gratitude to God. Creator of peoples is a quotation of an Ambrosian hymn for Christmas, Veni Creator Gentium. And Ludovico here translate Alamin with Mundi, Mundorum. Mundus in Latin is often limited to humanity, but in Arabic, Alamin is wager. But in his critical notes, Marracci recalls the Arab opinion that there are several universes, several Alamin, Alamun, but he compares it to the heretical doctrines of the Manichaeans. So, gradual standardization of the translation from one translator to another. It is just nuances that appear, but we can see a tendency to Christianize the Quranic vocabulary by liturgical and theological texts. Here, the difference, Malik Yawmiddin, Robert, Yawmiddin is, it's as in Arabic, refers to divine kingship of the day of the judgment. Only God intervenes in this judgment. And here, Robert takes up the idea expressed in Arabic, but does not understand the notion of din, which is very more complex than simply judgment in Arabic. Mark prefer die legis, the day of the law, of the judgment. We have two versions of this verse. It's very interesting because for Mark, the din is a lex. Din is lex. Din is law. It uses the same biblical formula because in the Bible, in the Old Testament, the lex Judaica as opposed to the gospel, the lex evangelica. Lex designates the Pentateuch, the law given by Moses. Lex foreshadows the gospel. So it's not totally negative to say lex concerning the Quran or concerning Islam. By qualifying the Quran as law, the translator immediately links it to an obsolete, strongly legal religious message. But while inscribing it in a biblical and Jewish tradition and not in a pure paganism. So, of course, the Quran is not strictly speaking a law. It is distinct from the science of Islamic law, the fiqh. But the word law, lex, associated with din is quite correct because it implies the observation of legal rights. Verse 5, to Robert, let's humble ourselves with pleading praise while worshiping him, that we continually feel the help of his hand. The Latin formula of Robert insists on the humility of the believer. The verb humiliare in Latin is very strong. The idea is a prostration, humiliation. The verb supplicare is liturgical in Latin. But the idea of the hand of God, is not here in the Surat, in the Quran. It gives an embarrassing human image picture. And the Alhamdulillah formula expresses the idea of praise and veneration. For Mark, you are the one we adore, through you have been helped. He offers a more compact formula than Robert, but the verb adorare in Latin is weaker than abd. And Ludovico gave the same vocabulary as Mark. Verse 6, اهدنا صراط المستقيم. For Robert, the grace of the way and the dogma. Dogma is a typical theological Latin word, and this notion is very varied. It can designate the orthodox belief, an opinion, and also heretic opinion. Sirat al-Mustaqim is a straight path, that is to say the Quran and Islam. The formula is at the same time moral, religious. And here, Sirat al-Mustaqim, the translator uses a duplicate, semita and dogma. But here, he gave the impression that Islam is an heretical Christian doctrines. So it's not very good. He adapt the surah, the vocabulary of the surah, to a typical Christian vocabulary. And Mark is closer to the text, give us back the straight path, and Ludovico is the same, sometimes like the same thing. The uniformity of the translations is amazing between Mark and Ludovico. They must have reached each other at the opposite of Robert. And finally, the verse 7. So I want to finish quickly because we have to discuss, to have a discussion. Here, what is very interesting, it's the annotations, because the problem is those three texts, three translations are very specific, but in the margin of the whole manuscript of the three texts, you can read, can find annotations. And here, even the traduction is very good, or almost good. You can find and read annotations who are very, we interpret the Quran, the Alcoran, in a bad sense. Here, you can see Ecce fabula de vaca. What nonsense about the cow, because of which the whole chapter is called Azora of the cow. So when I am a reader of the Middle Age, I read the translation of Robert, and certainly this translation doesn't give me a judgment, a bad judgment of the Alcoran, but the annotation in the margin give it to me a bad judgment. And it's the same thing in the text of Ludovico Marracci. Here you can see the Surah 114. You can see the text in Arabic, and after the translation in Latin. After, on the footnote, the notae, it's not judgment in the notae. Notae are explanations of the context of the revelation, explanation concerning the vocabulary in Arabic. And after, here you have at right, you have footnotes concerning refutationes. And here you have polemic text against the Quran. So this is a problem. So even your traduction is very good or almost good, every reader will read the annotations in the margin and the footnotes. So for conclusion, Robert looks for meanings in the Christian Latin word, while Mark and Ludovico Marracci offer shorter but more literal formulas. The different translations are adaptations to the Latin liturgical and Western theological vocabulary. None completely distorts the text, but none manages to capture the multitude of meanings of the Arabic language. The most dubious translation is that of Robert. The most faithful to the rhythm and to the meaning is that of Mark, who was an Arabic speaking by birth, and no Robert. The most exact and the most acute is that of Ludovico Marracci. All of them adapt the Quran to Latin rhetoric, define the Surah al-Fatiha as a poetic text, and adapt it to the doctrinal nuances of Christian Latin. It's especially the comments in the margins or at the bottom of the page that create the controversy, the judgment, and not the text itself. Despite the complexity of the text, the translation differences are not that great, indicating a tendency toward homogeneization. It should be noted that the translation reached a very high standard with Ludovico, in particular thanks to the comments which allow a good understanding of the text. Thank you very much.